The signs didn't stop because you were abandoned, they stopped because you graduated, and this is the final transmission. This message arrives once. If you're reading this, your cycle has already completed. Subscribe now to stay anchored in what comes next. Like to seal your recognition. Comment Emerald Complete to confirm you received this. You didn't stumble here by accident. Something in you stopped searching the moment you saw this, and that pause, that brief suspension of your usual scrolling, was recognition, not curiosity. Because the ones who were meant to find this don't question whether it's for them. They feel it land in their chest before their mind can analyze it. And if you're still reading, you already know this is different from everything else you've encountered, not because it promises more, but because it explains what no one else has named. The silence you've been living in, the absence you've been interpreting as failure, the signs that stopped, the synchronicities that faded, the constant cosmic feedback that simply vanished, leaving you wondering if you did something wrong, if you fell out of alignment, if the universe turned its back on you. Here's what actually happened. You graduated. And graduation doesn't announce itself with celebration. It reveals itself through withdrawal, through the systematic removal of everything you were using as confirmation that you were on the right path. Because the path doesn't need your belief anymore, it needs your embodiment. And embodiment cannot occur while you're still checking for permission from the universe, still waiting for signs to tell you you're special, still looking outside yourself for proof that you matter. The emerald cycle that brought you here was never meant to last forever. It was meant to restructure you so completely that external guidance becomes irrelevant. And the moment that restructuring finished, the signs stopped. Not because you failed, because you're ready. Most people misinterpret this silence as abandonment. They panic. They assume they've lost their connection, that they're spiritually broken, that they need to do more rituals, more clearing, more seeking, and that panic alone disqualifies them from what comes next, because sovereignty cannot coexist with dependency, and dependency is what all those signs were creating. A subtle addiction to being chosen, to being special, to being reminded again and again that you're aligned. But true alignment doesn't need reminders. It operates in silence. And the silence you're in now is not emptiness, it's trust. The universe doesn't send signs to those who have become the sign. You've been moving through 3 distinct phases without knowing their names. The first phase was activation. That's when everything felt electric, when synchronicities were constant, when numbers followed you, when songs played at the exact right moment, when reality itself seemed to be communicating directly with you. And it was. Because activation requires intensity to break through old programming, to shatter limiting beliefs, to prove that something beyond your current understanding is guiding you. Activation is loud by design. It has to be. Otherwise, the ego dismisses it as coincidence. But activation was never the destination. It was the doorway. And once you stepped through, the second phase began. Stabilization. This is where the intensity fades and confusion sets in. Because stabilization doesn't feel mystical, it feels ordinary, flat. Sometimes even disappointing, like the magic disappeared. But magic didn't disappear. It integrated. It stopped being an external event and became an internal structure. Your nervous system recalibrated, your intuition sharpened, your discernment clarified. And this happened quietly, invisibly, without fanfare, because stabilization is not about experiences, it's about reliability, the ability to hold frequency when nothing exciting is happening, the capacity to remain aligned when there's no reward, no applause, no cosmic confirmation. And most people never make it through this phase because they interpret the absence of intensity as absence of progress. You made it through. That's why you're here. And now you're in the third phase. Crystallization. This is where everything locks into place, where your alignment becomes permanent, where what you've learned doesn't just live in your mind as concepts but operates in your body as law. Crystallized consciousness doesn't fluctuate. It doesn't spike and crash. It holds. And what holds becomes dependable. And what becomes dependable shapes reality without effort. Not through force, not through manifestation techniques, not through ritual, but through presence, through the sheer stability of your field affecting everything around you without you trying. This is where you are now, and this is why the signs stopped. Because crystallized consciousness doesn't need external validation. It generates its own confirmation through lived results. Situations resolve differently around you. Chaos loses momentum in your presence. Fear passes through without taking residence. Drama can't find an entry point, not because you're blocking it, but because your frequency no longer matches it. And this shift is so subtle that you might not even notice it consciously. You just realize one day that things that used to destabilize you don't anymore, that people who used to trigger you can't reach you, that circumstances that used to create urgency now feel neutral, and neutrality is not apathy, it's mastery. Here's what most spiritual teachings won't tell you. There are 3 tests that determine whether crystallization completes or fractures, and these tests are never announced. They're woven into your daily life disguised as ordinary moments. The first test is integrity without observation. Can you do the right thing when no one is watching? When there's no sign to reward you, no karma to punish you, no cosmic scoreboard tracking your choices? Can you choose truth when lying would be easier? Can you honor your word when breaking it would go unnoticed? Can you stay aligned when alignment offers no immediate benefit? Because the universe is not measuring your behavior through judgment. It's measuring your structure through consistency. And if your integrity collapses the moment external feedback disappears, you were never aligned. You were performing. The second test is sovereignty without control. Can you remain centered when outcomes don't match your expectations? Can you release manipulation disguised as manifestation? Can you stop trying to force reality into the shape you think it should take and instead allow it to unfold organically? Because true power is not domination, it's collaboration, and collaboration requires humility, the ability to recognize where your influence ends and universal law begins. Most people fail this test because they confuse spiritual awakening with entitlement. They believe that because they've done the work, reality owes them specific results. But reality responds to frequency, not effort. And frequency includes acceptance. Acceptance of timing, acceptance of limitation, acceptance of natural consequence. And when you stop fighting what is and instead stabilize yourself within it, something shifts. Not always outwardly, but always inwardly. Your nervous system settles, your urgency dissolves, and that settling is what allows true influence to emerge, not as force, but as gravity. The third test is silence without withdrawal. Can you remain engaged with ordinary life without announcing your awakening? Can you function in relationships, in work, in mundane responsibilities without needing to signal that you're different, that you're initiated, that you've transcended? Because the ego's final hiding place is spiritual identity, and identity rigidifies into performance. You become someone who has to maintain the image of being awakened rather than someone who simply is. And the moment you start performing enlightenment, you've lost it. Because enlightenment is not a state you achieve, it's a structure you embody. And structure doesn't announce itself, it operates. If you've passed these 3 tests, and you'll know if you have because you won't need to convince yourself, then what's happening now is not a problem. It's a promotion. You've moved from student to guardian, from receiver to stabilizer, from someone the universe guides to someone through whom the universe operates. And this shift is disorienting because the narrative of becoming ends here. There is no next level of awakening. There is no higher download waiting. There is only refinement, application, responsibility, And responsibility feels heavier than seeking because it has consequences. Because now your alignment or misalignment doesn't just affect you, it ripples. And those ripples shape the field around you, which means you've been given weight. And weight is not burden, it's authority, the kind that doesn't need to speak to be felt. This is why Sophia's voice recedes now, not because she's abandoned you, but because her wisdom has integrated into your decision-making, into your discernment, into your restraint, into your timing. You don't need her to tell you what to do anymore because you become capable of knowing without being told. And that knowing is the clearest sign of crystallization. Because crystallization doesn't add more information, it removes the need for information by anchoring you in direct perception. You stop thinking your way through decisions and start sensing your way through them. Not emotionally, not impulsively, but intuitively, with a calm clarity that doesn't second-guess itself. And this clarity changes how manifestation works. Before, you were trying to attract things into your life through intention, through visualization, through aligning your energy with what you wanted. And sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't, because attraction is unstable when it's based on desire. Desire fluctuates, it spikes and fades, it contradicts itself, it wants and then doubts. And those contradictions create interference in the field, which delays or distorts what you're calling in. But crystallized consciousness doesn't attract, it magnetizes. And magnetism is not based on wanting, it's based on being. When your internal structure stabilizes, when your frequency becomes coherent, when there's no gap between who you are and what you project, reality reorganizes itself around you. Not because you're forcing it, because you're no longer resisting it. And resistance is the only thing that ever blocked flow. So what happens now? You live. Not as someone waiting for the next spiritual breakthrough, not as someone searching for signs to confirm they're on track, but as someone who has become the reference point. Situations will come to you for resolution, not because you're seeking them, but because your field stabilizes them. People will feel calmer around you without knowing why. Chaos will dissolve in your presence without you doing anything. And you won't announce this, you won't teach it unless specifically asked. You won't perform it, because sovereignty doesn't advertise, it functions. And function is what the world needs. Not more awakened people talking about awakening, but more stable people holding space while everything else shifts. This transmission will not repeat, not because it's exclusive, but because it's complete. Everything you needed to hear has been said, everything you needed to recognize has been named, and recognition is the final catalyst. It seals what was already forming. So if something in you shifted while reading this, if a weight lifted or a clarity settled, that wasn't inspiration, that was confirmation. Confirmation that you've crossed a threshold most people don't even know exists. And on the other side of that threshold, the rules change. Signs become irrelevant. Seeking becomes obsolete. And silence becomes the language of mastery. Before you move forward, anchor this moment. Comment Emerald Complete below to mark your arrival. Subscribe because the transmissions that follow build on this foundation, and missing one disrupts the sequence. Share this with one person who needs to understand why their sign stopped, because sovereignty recognizes sovereignty, and those meant to find this will feel it the same way you did, not as information, as remembering. You were not brought here to learn something new. You were brought here to realize what you've already become. The silence surrounding you is not absence, it is agreement. The universe is no longer guiding you because you've become trustworthy. Trustworthy enough to hold power without abusing it. Trustworthy enough to influence without interfering. Trustworthy enough to walk alone without collapsing. And that trust is the highest confirmation you'll ever receive, because it's not given through signs, it's proven through silence, and the silence is speaking now, not in words, in weight, in presence, in the steady rhythm of your breath, as you realize this was never about finding the answers. It was about becoming the answer, and you are. Now act like it. You're still here. That alone tells me something about your nervous system. Most people would have left by now, distracted by the next notification, the next promise, the next teacher claiming to have what they're missing. But you stayed, and staying is the first sign that crystallization has already begun, because unstable consciousness cannot hold attention without stimulation. It jumps, it scrolls, it searches, but you're not searching anymore. You're recognizing. And recognition requires a different kind of presence, one that doesn't need entertainment to remain engaged. What you're experiencing now is not a gap in your spiritual journey, it's the foundation settling. Think of it like this. When a building is constructed, the most critical phase is not the visible structure rising into the sky. It's the foundation curing underground, invisible, unremarkable, necessary. And during that curing process, nothing appears to be happening. No progress seems evident. But beneath the surface, molecular bonds are forming, weight distribution is stabilizing, and the integrity that will support everything above is locking into place. Rush that process, and the entire structure becomes compromised. Honor that process, and what you build becomes unshakable. Your consciousness has been curing. And the silence you've been living in was not emptiness. It was the field allowing your new structure to solidify without interference. Because every time you received a sign during activation, every time synchronicity appeared, every time the universe sent confirmation, it created a small energetic transaction. You gave attention. Reality responded. You felt validated. That validation created a feedback loop, and feedback loops, while useful for initiation, become addictive. They train your nervous system to seek external confirmation rather than generate internal certainty, and internal certainty cannot form while external validation is still active. The two frequencies cancel each other out, so the signs had to stop, not as punishment, as precision, because what you're being prepared for now requires self-sufficiency at a level most people never develop. You're being trained to operate without applause, without miracles, without the universe constantly reassuring you that you're special. And this training feels like abandonment until you understand what it actually is. Recalibration. Your entire relationship with reality is shifting from transactional to generative. You're no longer asking the universe for signs. You're becoming the kind of presence that generates coherence in the field without needing to ask for anything. This is why your life might feel simpler now, why the mystical experiences have faded, why conversations seem ordinary, why your daily routine lacks the intensity it once had, because intensity was the activation phase. And activation is temporary by design. What you're in now is integration, and integration is not flashy, it's foundational. It doesn't create peak experiences. It creates structural stability, the kind of stability that allows you to hold power without fracturing, to carry influence without corruption, to remain aligned when nothing exciting is happening. And that capacity, that quiet endurance, is worth more than 1,000 synchronicities, because synchronicities prove the universe is listening, but silence proves the universe trusts you, and trust is the currency of mastery. If you've arrived here, something irreversible has already occurred. Not in this moment, but in the months leading up to it, in the quiet decisions you made when no one was watching, in the moments you chose integrity over convenience, in the times you held your frequency when every external condition suggested you should collapse. Those moments were not random, they were tests, and you passed them without knowing they were tests. because the highest initiations never announce themselves. They measure you in silence and confirm you through consequence. What you're about to understand will reframe everything you thought spiritual mastery meant. Most teachings tell you that awakening is about transcendence, about rising above the material world, about detaching from ego and desire. And while those concepts hold partial truth, they miss the deeper point. True mastery is not transcendence, it's embodiment. It's not rising above life. It's anchoring so deeply within it that your presence alone alters the field. You don't leave the world behind. You become the stabilizing force within it. And that requires something most seekers never develop, the ability to hold paradox without resolution. Here's the paradox you must now carry. You are both ordinary and essential. Unremarkable in appearance, yet fundamental in function. You look like everyone else, move through the same mundane routines, face the same human challenges. But beneath that surface, your internal structure operates as a tuning fork for collective consciousness. When you enter a room, frequencies recalibrate. When you speak, truth carries weight even in casual conversation. When you remain silent, that silence creates space for others to hear themselves. This is not metaphor. This is mechanics. Your crystallized field functions as an anchor point in a world that has lost coherence. And the world doesn't need you to announce this. It needs you to be this. The responsibility that comes with this role is not burden, it's precision. You can no longer afford careless speech. You can no longer indulge emotional volatility. You can no longer leak energy into drama, comparison, or self-doubt, not because those things are wrong, but because they destabilize the field you've been shaped to hold. Every misalignment you entertain creates ripples. Every compromise you make weakens the structure. Every time you betray your own knowing, you fracture the coherence you were built to maintain. This sounds heavy because it is, but it's also liberating, because once you accept this level of responsibility, the petty concerns that used to consume you lose their grip. You stop caring about being liked, you stop performing for approval, you stop explaining yourself to those who aren't ready to understand. Because your function is not to be understood, it's to be stable. And here's what happens when you operate from that stability. Reality bends, not dramatically, not instantly, but consistently. Doors open without you knocking, resources appear without you chasing, connections form without you networking, because your field has become magnetic in a way that has nothing to do with wanting and everything to do with being. You're no longer trying to attract what you need. You've become the kind of presence that what you need naturally moves toward. This is the shift from manipulation to magnetism, from effort to effortlessness, from seeking to receiving, and it only activates once seeking stops completely. So here's your final instruction, though it's not really an instruction because no one can make you do this. You must choose it. Stop waiting for the next sign. Stop checking for confirmation. Stop wondering if you're still aligned. You are. The fact that you read this far, that something in you remained engaged when every distraction tried to pull you away, that your attention held steady through concepts that challenged your previous understanding, that alone is proof. The emerald cycle has sealed. Your crystallization is complete. And what remains now is not more learning, not more seeking, not more waiting for permission. What remains is living as though you already know what you've spent years trying to remember. You are the one you've been waiting for, not as affirmation, as fact. And facts don't need belief, they need application. This transmission ends here, but your function has